first of all, tell Hannah I said hello.
Okay.
She was one of the attendees to the library class back in the day. And when I stopped doing that, it was really sad. I didn't get the chance to see some of those students again. But yeah, idiomatic expressions. There's so many that one presentation could not contain enough, but maybe I could talk about the method. Because if you can make sense of idiomatic expressions, that's one way that you probably understood it when you were a child, hearing these and saying, well, what does that mean? You can understand from the context, but also from the phrase itself, there's probably some meaning. What was an example? Okay, so today I was talking with a student from Taiwan about to strike up a conversation, right? So to strike up, he's like, why do we use that? And you can make some sense of it. So in the same way that if you're trying to set a fire and you strike the flint, once you ask a question like, how are you? What have you been up to? Hopefully one of these things will catch and the conversation will start burning by itself. So if you can make sense of something like that, that's fine. Right? And Michelle's joined us. Hello, Michelle.
Hi.
Yeah, the one that really flummoxed me in terms of trying to explain was get your goat. Somebody got my goat.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's come up. I've had that come up too.
Where I don't know. Is it grab my goatee?
Yeah. I don't know what to do with that one.
Making sense of it. I would say the goat is valuable livestock. So if someone takes it, they're really going to upset you. That's the best I can do for that one. Okay, so I'll consider it. But we want to develop our YouTube channel as it is. And I took some notes the other day about the top 12, maybe not the top 12, just the top 12 well-known English teaching channels on YouTube, and what they did, what kind of videos they produced, how long and so on, 3 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes and so on. Idioms is something that's popular, and usually they do one idiom per video. So that might be 3 to 5 minutes. So we might, as an organization, tackle idioms for our students through that avenue. So we'll look forward to whatever solution we find. So it's about 7 minutes after. Let's get started. Let me screen share. Screen 2.
I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Sure. We're going to screen share with screen 2.
My phone.
Okay, let's begin the show. Oh, I didn't change the date. So it's November 19th, not October 20th. So today's topic, and I hope it's interesting, is one of the most common ESL requests, and that's the job interview. Has anyone here had an encounter with one of their students who is aspiring to find a job in the United States? Well, yes. So that's one for Larry. I didn't see everyone else. So no.
Well, Hannah thought she wanted to get into real estate, but once I explained to her the issues in taking the exam and whatnot, and I asked her to go to the Fairfield Library and get Real Estate for Dummies, and I said, this is not really what you need to study to pass the exam, but it's an introduction to the whole concept. But she just found it too difficult to work through. Even with me, I had the same book from the Trumbull Library, and she gave up, decided she didn't want to pursue that career opportunity.
Well, we'll talk about the primary motivators for learning English, but one of them is career advancement. So even if you're dealing with children who are learning English, they're going through the education process, hopefully to get to a point where they have skills which will allow them to succeed and to communicate in the current economy. So this exercise is useful for that situation. It's almost like the end of their journey. But it's also useful as an exercise for any student if you want to do conversation practice, or if you have a classroom and you want to have a role play with partners. So we'll talk about that, but I think it's directly transferable in many situations. So let's continue. Okay, just an update. I really want to pass 100,000 minutes. We're getting there, really close. All right. Almost to 1,200 students also.
Wow.
So maybe by the end of the year, I don't know. Okay, so today's game plan, we'll talk about why it's so common. We already basically explained a piece of that, and how it's generally applicable to other sides. Maybe we can breeze through that since we've basically said a bit. And then we'll talk about the keys to a successful interview or interview lesson, more like an interview learning experience. There's 3 components, and we're going to look at some questions that you can use at the end. So without spending too much time on the outline, we'll go right into it. So why is it so common? All right, so English is a practical tool, which you can use to communicate. That's the purpose of language. It's pretty awesome. But because of the course of history, English, like the dollar, is like the world's currency for business exchange in this case. So if you're going to choose a foreign language to learn in another country, most likely they'll have an English program for their students. Or some adult who's trying to advance will also want to check this off their lists of things they can do, which is to speak English at a professionally competent level. Okay, so I have here 4 reasons in my experience for why people might be studying English. The first one, future employment opportunities, and that includes students who are in school. Another is going to the gym for a conditioning type exercise. And by that I mean they can speak English. It might not affect their life if they can improve it at this point, but they want to stay at the same skill level they have. All right. Third, they plan to study abroad. And fourth, it's just a hobby, so there's no real reason. It's like, maybe even fleeting interest. Okay, but we're going to really address the first and most common reason I find that students are learning English. That's for future employment opportunities.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. What do you mean by going to the gym?
Going to the gym. So
You mean a gymnasium?
That's right.
Lift weights and work out?
Just exercise. Basically, it's like skill maintenance. Same thing for the body. I am still young, but I had some serious sports injuries in the past. And it became complicated simply by being inactive. So I got other problems because I had to rest. So when you have an injury, you don't want to lose the condition of your body because you're not using it the same way as before. And same thing, so that's why I say going to the gym. It's basically you have to keep moving to keep your body in a good condition. If you stop, then you start to become in a worse position. So that applies to any skill. For English, that was my line of thinking. They can speak it and they don't want to lose it completely. It's a lot easier just to go maybe 3 times a week, like to the gym, 3 times a week to chat with somebody, than to not speak English for 10 years and then lose the skill completely at a time when you need it.
Jim, the idiom that covers both going to the gym and retaining your English capabilities is use it or lose it.
Aha. Thank you very much, George. You're right. Use it or lose it. So you can go to the gym to improve accumulation, or you can go to the gym to maintain. But one way or the other, if you don't use it, you will lose it. Okay, so the archetypal request. Now, we work with students over a long-term basis, but if you ever encounter a student or you have the opportunity to help one, probably that situation will look like this. That future employment opportunity is not so far in the future now. It might be tomorrow or it might be next week. So whatever English level they have at this point, they have to work with that and succeed in the interview. So this particular encounter might not be so much about improving their English, but allowing them to use whatever English they have at this point to say what they need to say for this interview. And we'll talk about what that is. Okay. If this is your first encounter with the student, then probably this might be your last also, because they're only here for one reason. They just want to practice for the interview. And in so doing, you don't really make a personal connection. So probably they won't come back. Maybe they will. Okay, now conversation, like we've talked about before, is one of the primary components of language tutoring. So in this case, the conversation is pretty straightforward. The role play will be the student as themselves interviewing for the position, and you will pretend to be the interviewer. Very simple. So you could do that in any lesson if you wanted. Okay, so why is this generally applicable? One reason is use it or lose it. If you're prepared at the drop of a hat to give a good interview, that's really useful. Or at the same time, I should say that goes both ways, whether or not you're trying to find a better position or you're trying to find someone to join your team. So if you can keep the questions clearly in your mind as well as the answers, it's like staying sharp. Again, use it or lose it. Okay, at the same time, it can clarify a lot about how you're doing. So if you know exactly what you want, what kind of job, what your aspirations are, and is what I'm doing now or what I've done in the past suitable for that? If you can assess that full situation, it's a good exercise. So whether or not you get the job, usually this is a really healthy, heartening experience to go through a job interview. Okay, and one more time, you can use this whether you're tutoring one-on-one or if you're in the classroom, because anyone can do the role play, even if it's partners. Okay, so any questions before we dive in? All right, let's keep moving. Okay, so this is the same outline as before. There's 4 components, in my opinion. I should say 3 components, and then we're just going to practice. So the 3 components are inside and out knowledge. By that I mean you need to know this when you go in. Right, so you need to know about the position, you need to know about your relevant experience, and you need to know about your direction in life. If you can explain that in English at a suitable level for this position, then that really puts you in the right place for the interview. All right, the second, we're going to look at behavioral interviewing. That will help us as tutors because it will give us an idea about what questions do we ask. Like, I know everyone can say, tell me about yourself. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Yes, those are important. But if you really want to prepare the student for the interview, we're going to practice the behavioral interviewing side of this. There's 2 components, the STAR method and philosophy of mind. All right, so then we'll go into question drills, which means you have to collect basically a bank of questions, which has everything you would need to answer for that position, and you practice on a daily basis with flashcards, for example. Okay, and finally, like I said, we'll practice a little bit. Okay, so inside and out knowledge, what does that mean? You need to memorize and explain the requirements of the position and also the culture of the company. Why? Because you need to present yourself as if you're qualified for the position and that you can fit in. So if you know who you should be for this job, you can arrange the facts about you to suit that position. So how can you do that? First, if you have the job posting, you should really look deeply into it to find the individual responsibilities. So print it out, mark it up, retype it so you have like a numbered list of what is required for that position. This is advice you could give your students. Say, well, you have the interview next week. Do you know about the position? If they don't know everything, every responsibility, then they can't be prepared to answer for that at that time. So they should go through that step. All right. So when you have a clear concept of what the job is in your mind, you can, well, it puts you in the proper position to, first of all, whether you succeed or not at this stage, because you might be rejected, you don't know what's happening. There could be a lot of competition, and even if you're qualified, you won't be chosen. It's like rolling the dice. But if you have a clear subconscious understanding of who you need to be for this job, afterwards you can start living your life in a way that will accumulate the skills and experience to qualify again at a later time. Okay, so what I have here is you will be ready when the time is right, right? Maybe now is not the right time, but you will be ready when the time is right. Okay, so number two, this is be able to articulate all relevant experience. It shouldn't be relative, it should be relevant experience. And how can you know what experience you've had is relevant or not? First of all, you need to know all the responsibilities. So that's why step one was understand the position. If you understand the position, then you can tailor what you've done in your life and what skills you have to be relevant in this interview. Okay, so like we said before, with this base, you're in the proper position to succeed. The quote I have is from Sun Tzu. It's invincibility lies in the defense. So if you're prepared with an answer for every responsibility that you could have in this position, I don't think you can fail the interview. You can't walk in there and flop on a question, though we'll look at the behavioral side. So if you want to be invincible when you're sitting down with the potential employer, just be ready. And being ready takes some preparation. Okay, so step three, know what you want. We'll talk about that in a second. Because it's a little more complicated. So how long should your answers be? Just as a rule of thumb, it seems that speaking smoothly for 2 minutes is the ideal. This comes from my experience in Toastmasters. I don't know if anyone has ever been a member of Toastmasters. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. So it's just a club where you go and everyone gets a chance to speak in front of a group of people, and they provide feedback about how you did. And you can use it to tailor to any of your goals. Like, for example, if you have a presentation at work, you can bring that and just give it for 5 minutes, and they'll tell you, oh, that was really great, but I really wish you didn't keep turning around to look at your presentation, right? At the end, there's also an extemporaneous speech exercise where you get these fun questions and you have to think on your feet. So all these things considered, speaking in a well-organized, fluent speech for 2 minutes is really good. It's not too long, people don't drift off in their attention. And basically it demonstrates that you can speak well. Okay, so when you do that, you might run out of things. Actually, you don't run out of things to say if you can keep the flow going. So just keep talking, even if there isn't, it seems like I don't have to say anything more, because the exercise of reaching 2 minutes is to basically develop the ability to speak fluently and to organize your thoughts. So bringing this back to working with your students, you want them to be able to speak fluently, to speak smoothly and in a well-organized manner. So this is an exercise. In the interview themselves, I'm not telling them to actually force themselves to speak more than is necessary, but I mean for the exercise, for the interview, try to encourage the student to speak for 2 minutes, because that will draw out all that can be said and will push them to reach the next level. If this is an exercise, we do want them to push themselves. All right, but don't talk too long either. That just means don't say too much, because people will stop paying attention. All right. So this goes back to the third step in the inside and out knowledge. The first step was memorize everything, or I should say, know everything there is to know about the position and have an answer ready. So draw from your past experience and suit it to what the position requires and what the culture of the company requires. Step 3, I said, was know what you want. But is it step 3 or is it step 0? When you meet the student for the first time, probably it's step 3, because you can't be in that meeting and say, well, before we prepare for the interview you have tomorrow, I think you should reassess your whole life. So that's why in that situation it's step 3. It will probably come up as, well, how does this position fit your long-term goals? But if the student has time, or if they do this and are made self-aware from the experience, this is really step 0. So what exactly is it that you want to do in your life? What are you suited to do? So breaking that down, the last bullet point here begins a list where the student should do a full self-evaluation and understand his or her, 1, nature. And by nature, I mean the natural abilities which make you more or less suited for a particular activity. So for example, if you're really tall, you might say, well, you would have an advantage in basketball. Or this is one that comes from strength training often. If we have a really big and heavy guy, we say, why are you trying to be a long distance runner? If you went over and picked up a bar, a heavyweight, you would be miles ahead of the competition because you're suited for that as opposed to going against the grain, just as an example. But of course, these things can be changed. So they could go down, for example. Injury can modify what you can do. So at this point for me, I don't know if I could be a professional athlete. But if I started much earlier and I avoided certain sports injuries, then it still might be in my nature to do sports seriously. But because of history, that changed. So the way I have it here is going against your nature is like water flowing uphill, right? Rather than going in the easiest path. So if you have a stream coming down from the top of the mountain, it doesn't carve a path straight to the bottom. Usually it goes in the natural path until it reaches its final destination. So again, understand your nature, what you're suited for. Assess your acquired skills and experience, or what you would need, because this can be modified more easily than your nature. And secondly, make a list of all your goals and desires, because if you know what you want in life, like if I asked any of us now, what is your most important goal, or what is your top 10, what are your top 10 most important goals? It might not be easy to answer right off the bat, but if you do have that organized, I think you have an advantage. Okay. So I have a quote here from Brian Tracy, who's just a success speaker. I happen to like him. I'm not saying he's the only one. His quote is called the law of forced efficiency, which is, there is never enough time to do everything, but there is always enough time to do the most important things. So in a day, when you start, you might say, there's an incredible amount of things that I could do, but I can only do one or a few. So what is the most important thing for me? This law, I'm not saying it's a law, but it's a principle of life. According to this law, you do have enough time to do the most important thing, but you have to prioritize it above other things. So just to continue with what a full self-assessment could look like, I took this from Brian Tracy's audio program, Action Strategies for Personal Achievement. Right? I have no financial incentive for recommending that. I have to say that. It's part of the YouTube policy, if you can believe it. But I listened to his audio program and I wrote down the stimulating questions he has. And we're not going to go through every one, but basically, if you want to understand what direction you want in your professional life, you could ask yourself something like, what is it that you would most enjoy doing? What is it that you have been good at in the past? What are you best qualified to do? And so on. Just going down and having a clear image about what it is you would want. Afterwards, you could find a company that actually fits everything you want. For example, maybe not a company, because this could be transferred to any pursuit in life. Right? And so this resource will be available if you go to our YouTube channel. But these are the kinds of questions you could help your student prepare for. So they could strike up a conversation, or they could help your student really assess, what is it that you would like to do? What is your direction? Okay. So that's our first section, inside and out knowledge. Any questions before we move on? All right, sounds good. Let's keep going. Okay, so we're going to look at behavioral interviewing, which is a recent paradigm of interviewing. What it does is it seeks to understand how you could act in the future based on your previous behavior. Now, I say it's a recent paradigm, though I think it's been around for a few decades. Still, that's recent in my opinion. There might be more completely new changes, like personality testing, but we won't look at that, and it's not really applicable to an ESL lesson. Okay, so what does a behavioral interview question look like? Here's an example. Talk about a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was very different from yours. Okay, so who would like to give a bad answer to this question? Any volunteers? I think I see George. Go ahead.
Yeah, all right. A bad answer would be, it was a difficult time and I just got through it as quickly as I could.
Okay. It's bad because, maybe there's not enough details. It's short. you said you got through it. Does that mean you succeeded, George, in that time?
Yes, I guess I did succeed, but I didn't learn anything. It was an obstacle that I overcame or blundered my way through. And that's not really the good answer. The
It's
good
true.
answer is that you learn something from the experience.
Excellent point. Yeah, so we're going to see that. So again, one other thing, the rule of thumb for 2 minutes is good not just for the exercise for your student, speaking in ESL, but also you do want to make sure you have enough details. I think a blunt or terse answer gives the wrong impression. Like, talk about a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was very different from yours. It's never happened. Right?
Tim,
Yes.
I also think, when you're answering that question, you want to be careful not to, do the blame game, so to speak, that it's all the other person's, because your personality may be different. So to elaborate, and this would be the good answer on how you made it work, but don't play too much into what the other person did that was bad, or in
Excellent
your
point.
opinion.
Yeah, so you can reveal a lot about your own perspective and character depending on your answer. So if you have that blame game mentality, that could show that you might be troublesome in this new position. Okay, so one thing to notice is that the attention in these questions is often about effective cooperation in spite of a challenging situation. So usually they will ask you something difficult, like talk about a time when you failed, right? But they want you to demonstrate how you were effective in spite of whatever challenge was present at that time. Okay, so what does the good answer look like? The interviewer is very likely trained to recognize if you go through the STAR method. I'm not saying that they have a clipboard with the check mark, but probably they want to make sure that you explain the situation, right? You talk about the task at hand at that time. What were your actions and what were your results? So more specifically, what does that look like? So the situation means you have to give objective details about the context, right? I think the most important questions to answer was who was involved, where were you, when was this? The what and the why comes next. But so I think if you can tell who was involved, those details, where it was, when, you cover the situation. So as a note, remember that the interviewer must understand clearly what's happening. So, and they have a limited attention span. So be clear, organized from beginning to end, and brief. Not too brief. Make sure you don't omit anything important, but at the same time, don't say anything unnecessary. Okay, so task, I actually think would be better named goals, but that wouldn't form the word STAR, which is nice. So this is the why and what for. So causes which preceded it and whatever the direction, whatever object you were trying to attain afterwards. Excuse me. Okay. So then when the why and what for are explained, elaborate on the actions. So what did you actually do? And when you explain this, make sure that these reflect well on you. So don't tell a story which highlights your bad behavior. Right? This is why practice might be good in the first place, because when you're given this question and you want to search your memory, you might have a best story. The best story shows you in the best way. Other stories might be more complicated. You might have had ups and downs on the way. And again, I wanted to include this in a slide. Don't ever lie in an interview. Right? The best thing to do is to be completely honest, because you want to get things at the right time. If you have to lie to get what you want, I don't think you're getting things at the right time. I think you have to wait and do everything honestly. It would be better to not get the job than to get it by dishonest means. Okay, just as an aside. But again, if you're going to select a story, you would want to choose the one that has the most positive reflection of yourself. One where you can tell the complete story without omitting details deliberately. Because that in a way is a form of lying or dishonesty. Okay, you want to show effective behavior under challenging circumstances. Okay, that's the actions as well as the results. Just like what George said, there's two components. There's what you accomplished and what you learned. So if you really want to satisfy the R component of the STAR method, you should say both, not just, oh, we did it, but also this is what I learned. You want to show that you're a person who can improve through their experience, or who strives to understand what happened and what kind of solutions you can make going forward. Okay, so we talked about effective behavior. So what does that mean? That depends on your results. So if your actions were effective, that could only be possible if you actually got the result you wanted. Okay, so what is a home run answer? It's a well-organized answer which hits the S, the T, the A, and the R without omitting anything important and without adding anything unnecessary, smoothly articulated for 2 minutes. And that's a home run. So when I'm doing an ESL interview for this kind of situation, I'll break out my stopwatch and I'll ask the question. Maybe I'll give them a minute to think. So the total thing will take about 3 minutes. But I'll ask them the question, give them a minute to think and organize their thoughts. And then I'll see if they can go through the full STAR method, situation, task, actions, and results, without going over significantly. And 2 to 3 minutes is fine, but we have an ideal, which I can say, you did this well, or you could improve in this way. That's probably one of the reasons why interviewers are trained on the STAR method, is because they do want an objective standard. Like, oh, that sounded like a really good answer. But that's impression. Maybe they actually missed some components, like the situation wasn't completely elaborated. Okay, so would anyone like to try it? Would anyone like to try the STAR method on a real behavioral interview question? I'm not seeing much enthusiasm. Let me open up, one moment. If I move this, all right, cool. I can take a look at some questions, and maybe if you see the question or hear the question, you'll say, I can do that. Okay, that's a long question. I don't like it. It's also really long. Okay, someone could do this. All right, this one is, tell me about a time when you needed to get information from someone who wasn't very responsive. What did you do? Any volunteers for that question? Not much enthusiasm. I might have to call in someone. I'll try once again. Okay. Describe a time when it was especially important to make a good impression on a client. How about Larry? Could you describe a time when it was especially important to make a good impression on a client?
Okay, well, when I was beginning I'm a physician, and when I began my medical practice, I didn't have a whole lot of patients to see. I had a lot of time on my hands. So I wanted to increase my work volume. by becoming the company doctor for local companies. And that would allow my practice to build up. And so I had a couple of interviews with local companies, and I wanted to show that I was competent and experienced in occupational medicine and occupational injuries.
Mm.
And I went to several of these interviews at big local companies. I won't give the names necessarily, but they worked out well, and they hired me to do their occupational medicine.
Mm.
And I did them for a number of years. And then by kind of mutual agreement, I diminished my activity in these areas. And by then my own private practice was at the point where I was happy to just take care of that.
Mm.
But it served a very useful purpose, and it got me to where I wanted to go.
Very nice. You know, I didn't time you. That's too bad. It felt like 2 minutes. Right. Thanks, Larry. So I think Larry hit everything. We had the situation, right? If I understood the situation correctly, this was when you were starting out, you wanted to make a good impression in these interviews, right? So that was blended with the task. So I understood who was involved, these companies, yourself. The task was to increase your work volume. The actions, I think we didn't develop so much. So what did you do in those interviews itself? So yes, we did the interviews, and we know the results, which is everything worked out in the end. Your own private practice developed. If I gave you feedback, I would just say, well, what exactly were your effective actions in the interviews themselves? Yeah, so that's basically the exercise for your students also, right? You would time them, say, okay, great job. And you were clear on everything. Oh, maybe you put T before S, or maybe you didn't go very clearly into actions, or maybe you didn't tell me what you learned, for example. But that's the objective standard which you can work with for your students. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so the other side of this behavioral interviewing preparation is what I call the good fortune philosophy. Okay, so even if you don't have ideal stories now, probably in the future you will be in a position to explain your effective behavior in the past, which means that any time in your life that you encounter something challenging, you should really look at it as good fortune. Because if you can act well in this situation, that's a future good story you can tell. Say, okay, perfect. If I hit everything in this, if I act effectively and get the good results in spite of the challenges, I'll just add another story to my stock, which I can tell in the future. Okay, so that might be a source of confidence also. If you actually go through that, you can have in your mind a treasure trove of memories of effective behavior. Say, good, right? So I behave honorably no matter what happens. I always get the best result. I'm not saying you always get exactly what you wanted, because maybe what you wanted was not possible, but you get the best possible result. Right, as an aside, I said this might explain the psychological origin of the account at the end of days idea, which is, so I have here, God says, why did you bury your gifts in the sand? And you say, well, you know, I was too afraid to try. So in that interview, how well are you doing? Good question. All right, so we'll go on to the question drilling component. The ones that I used before, the one that Larry answered was from an online magazine. That one's called The Muse. So that's one side of this, right? So where to find? One is that you want to collect the best kinds of questions from the current article on these job preparation sites. But more directly, you want to go to glassdoor.com. Has anyone gone to Glassdoor? Well, you can recommend it to your friends. It's a great website which collects reviews for companies and salary information and details on interviews. So many different people who have gone through interviews for various positions at a company will give a rating on their experience over a few factors. They'll explain what happened, and they'll also tell you some of the questions that were asked. So you can go to those. Probably the best would be to go directly to the position that you're trying to get and take the questions that were asked, that were actually asked. But you can also go to other positions for that company, because you could prepare for those either. Also, if you prepare for those, you might actually be prepared for a promotion, for example. Well, I want this job, but ideally I'd like to be at that level in 5 years. So what questions will I have to answer at that time? And can I be prepared to answer them now?
I have a question.
Yes.
So this Glassdoor.com has questions from specific companies or just questions in general?
I could show you. So let me do that, because that would probably give you as many details as possible. Right, so we'll go to Google, we'll do glassdoor.com, and I'll screen share again. I don't want to look from this side. So while I'm setting this up, does anyone have a company you'd like to see information about, like Amazon or Rite Aid? Because what I'll do is I'll search for like Rite Aid job interview questions.
Any company, Bayer Pharmaceuticals?
I think George said Hannah wanted to do real estate. So let me try real estate. So real estate interview questions. All right, we're on time. And we'll see if I can get something from Glassdoor. All right, let me add Glassdoor as a keyword. Okay, so I'm going to screen share again. Screen 2. Share. All right, so this was obtained through a simple Google search result. X out of that. So real estate interviews. Right, this is Glassdoor.com. If I go to the home page, it should look just like this. I don't like to be known when I'm searching these things, so usually I don't sign in. Which is why the best way to find what you want might be just to go through Google, because if you go through Google, you'll be brought past the homepage into whatever's here. Apparently, sign up for free to continue using Glassdoor. Apparently, I've overloaded the cookies. It knows that I've seen this page twice. Let me go back. And what I'm going to type in is something like Rite Aid shift supervisor interview questions. Okay, so as you can see, the top results, no keyword was Glassdoor, but it's going to bring me here. So let's see if it blocks me, because I was just at this page. I was just at the website. So no. Yes, it is. Right, too bad. If you want to sign in, you could see more. So today I won't be able to show you anything. But what it has is a list of experiences from people who went to do an interview for this position. And it says, describe your experience. And you'll say what happened, right? How long did it take? Say, 2 weeks or 6 weeks. And we'll say, what questions did they ask you? And then you'll type in those also. You get ratings like, how was your experience? 1 to 5 stars. How was the difficulty? 1 to 5 stars. Right? It's a really useful resource. So
So
let me,
you don't give your identity when you're filling this out, right? I mean,
no,
if you were hired by that company, you may not necessarily want the rest of the world knowing the details of their interview process.
it is anonymous. Though I never did it because I know that nothing is completely anonymous. As you can see, I don't sign into Facebook regularly because that's one way that they can track you. Not that I have anything to hide,
Hmm.
right? And just maybe very cautious. Okay. So question drilling. We said where to find Glassdoor, great place, right? Normally you wouldn't have that kind of problem where you can't see it directly, but if you really wanted to do an interview, of course you would sign in and then have no obstacle, right? So when you have your list of questions, either from the Muse or from Glassdoor, then you should make flashcards. You can make them on paper, you can make them electronically. What I recommend is that you use Quizlet. That's the electronic version. Because if you're in the office, right, in the office waiting for the interview, you can still be practicing using your phone. There's a Quizlet app. There's also the Quizlet website. And you can go through your flashcards just to stay as sharp as possible for these interview questions. It's like being warmed up. Okay. Now, I certainly recommend practicing face-to-face, so with your tutor, for example. But at the same time, you can't always practice for as many hours as you need to practice, relying on someone else. You can only take that from your own time. So if you're going to be practicing these interview flashcards, I recommend that you write it in a journal. And if you're trying to master English concurrently with this exercise, you can bring what you've written in your journal to your tutor, and they can help you correct the sentences. Because that might be an easier way to look at all of the English mistakes that were made. In the face-to-face practice, you might want them to be smooth for 2 minutes. I'm not saying perfect for 2 minutes, but just to express themselves smoothly for 2 minutes. That might mean that you're going to gloss over the errors that they make at that time. If you want to really zoom in on those errors, the best way to do that is in writing, in my opinion. Okay. If you want to learn more about that cycle, we have an earlier presentation which was about writing exercises. And we talk about the writing cycle for feedback. Right? So let's look at a Quizlet question bank. I have this open. I think it's good. I'm going to bring it over to the screen. There's ads, so forgive me. This is Quizlet. So if I go to Quizlet, the homepage, I'll show you what that looks like. It's just a website, though they have an application which you can use on your phone also. You can just make sets of electronic flashcards. So if you look at all of my sets, I've made a few. Right, these are different kinds of job interview questions. Right, I was trying to get a sales job in the past, and I collected some. Right, like here, 200 cards. Right, and basically, it just, I would have one side you could have anything, but in this case, I just want to respond to this. How would you describe the responsibilities of the role? That's pretty simple, but you want to be ready for that question, right? To have a clear and articulate answer in that situation. Let's go back and we'll look at the Muse behavioral interview questions. So I had this open. Number 6 was the one that Larry answered. Let's try number 7. Okay. All right, so it says, give me an example of a time when you did not meet a client's expectation. What happened and how did you attempt to rectify the situation? right? So you'd want to have a story ready for that kind of question. We all know that it's not possible to be perfectly prepared for any question they could ask you, but if you had 30 stories prepared for these very comprehensive situations, I think you could adapt to what they could possibly ask in the interview. Right, again, tell me about a time when you made sure a customer was pleased with your service. Okay. So these could, if you'd like, you could prepare a bank of questions like this, which are suitable for your students' level to practice if they ever wanted to go through this kind of role play. Right? Describe a time when you had to interact with a difficult client. What was the situation and how did you handle it? Okay. So how do you go about prioritizing your customers' needs? So we could go on, but I think you understand. Basically, this is what you would have prepared for the interview, or what you would recommend to your student to have prepared. And that could be their exercise. They can answer these with you, or they could prepare a journal, which you could correct. And they can get the app on their phone so that if they're in the office waiting for the interview, they can stay sharp. All right, let's bring back the PowerPoint. Okay, so that's the last part. Any questions? All right. So thanks very much. It was my pleasure to bring this side of the student experience to you. So having this ready, I didn't prepare any of those flashcards, for example, for teaching English. In that activity, it turns out that so many people wanted to do job interviews that it was a good resource to have and adapt to helping the student. All right, George, you're just in time. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, but my mother is in a nursing home for rehabilitation. She's 99 years old, and that was the rehab director that I needed to have that conversation.
It's no trouble, George. So yeah, I appreciate everyone attending. We have one more schedule to fill out the year. That will be next month on the 17th, I believe. Yeah, Thursday the 17th. So I hope to see everyone there.
I hope to see you all too.
Okay, thank
Have
you.
a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe, everyone.
Right. I'll see you next time.
Okay.
So we got a slow computer. Right. Let's do that. Move this. And then leave.